Hello, my name is Nina Young, and I'm a composer and sonic artist who will be presenting on my work today to you as part of the Impact series. It's been quite a year and a difficult one for artists, and one in which I think we've all individually felt very alone. And the truth is that being a composer and artist requires a lot of alone time, and it can be a very solitary pursuit. So, in my practice, instead of trying to work alone, I always try to work together with others as much as possible to have a dialogue in which we can communicate and share a language of art making and exploration. So, today, instead of strictly talking about my own work and practice that ranges from instrumental compositions to works using computers and interactive electronics, I want to share with you four collaborators from my world and the works that we've created from a distance in this last year. One of the things that I love about these collaborations is they were uniquely made to share on the screen. It wasn't a substitute in any way. And so the first piece I'm going to share with you is a piece called Touch. And I was actually playing with shadow puppets at night, really reminiscing on the idea of what it was like to touch another human. And so the Hackett Ensemble, which is comprised of pianists and composers Sarah Gibson and Thomas Kotcheff, decided to make a project called What Does 2020 Sound Like? And in this project, I decided to play with the idea of touch and what that could mean for two pianists at the same piano. So now I'm really delighted to introduce Sarah and Thomas, and you're going to get a little sneak peek at a conversation that we had about this project and about a previous project that we had worked on together called Tête à Tête.
I think, always Sarah and I have believed that we just want to be collaborative. And so if the artist came along and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking, we'd be like, great, let's go for it, So we really like to be kind of a vehicle for music and for creation.
So you guys commissioned Tête à Tête from me with the help of the LA Phil in 2017, and that was super fun. And when I was actually composing that piece, I was also thinking about gestural choreography between the two of you, but in that case, playing with the idea of Hackett and you guys actually embodying your name.
Oh my gosh, it was so fun. I mean, and it was also, the piece was also about communication, and about like the sending messages back and forth. And that's very appropriate with what we do as well. I think it was really fun with that piece because toy pianos they're toys, right? Like they're very different than the actual piano. So the idea of like super articulate Hacketting with toy piano is like 11 compared to Hacketting with like, $100,000 pianos, that you play on at a concert stage. So it like really was super challenging and amazing to like figure out, it like took us to the brink of our toy piano abilities with that sort of thing. It was really, really fun to work on.
And so we had this project where we wanted to allow the composers to write miniatures for us that we could turn around with a very fast rehearsal and a fast recording and put it out there. So that way the composer wrote the piece July 1st and July 7th, the music was in the world and existing. And so at the end of the project, we have, about 3.5 months worth of diary entries from 50 composers, which we're really proud of.
Yeah, I remember back to when you guys gave me the prompt, and then Sarah, I was texting you, asking you if you guys were touching each other, if you were sitting at the same piano, or if this was remote collaboration, and all of these questions because of the nature of what I was going to have you do in the piece.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, Nina, we've talked about this before too, like, and we know that there is this intrinsic choreography that goes with Thomas and me sitting on the same piano bench. But you're the only composer ever, and definitely in those 50 pieces too, that had us hold hands, and like had us choreograph something off of the piano, and like that was very new, and that was very cool. And like I remember telling Thomas when I saw that, I was like, man, with any other composer, this would be so hard to not be cheesy, but it's so effective. And it's like really, no, but seriously, it's just like, it's really evocative. And like in the moment, it was just like, we were both, like Thomas said, it's like Nina's going to do it right. And it was just very cool.
Next up, I want to introduce you to my friend and collaborator, the multimedia artist, Yulia Lenina. Please go and check out her work. It's really incredible. Together in fall of 2020, we worked on a project called Always and Forever. And I'm going to show you a little conversation that we had recently on Zoom while Yulia was in Vienna.
My process is that I make paintings first, and then I turn them into animation. And so I started making these drawings that I would then gift to frontline medical workers, and in exchange, they would write the experience about what they were going through in the hospitals or at home during that time. And it was really beautiful exchange. The piece was in some way dedicated to my father. My father was diagnosed with cancer, with the final stage of cancer, pretty much at the beginning of pandemic as well. And so I was thinking about him. I was thinking about the impending death, and it was really hard not to be able to be near him. And my mother died from cancer as well. So that, all of it together was sort of floating around. And so so this piece was basically a reaction to what was going on in my life. And it has a little black kitten as a kind of the main protagonist. And this black kitten we got basically also at the beginning of pandemic, just to kind of help us all deal with what was going on by caring for another creature, especially the small one. And so this kitten became, in a way, my my stand-in, my avatar.
I find it fascinating that you are making these characters first, these images, and then introducing them into animation. So can you talk a little bit about the process of moving from a static art to a time-based art?
I started off as a painter, and then I became a sculptor, and I started making animatronic characters, films, and so at some point it kind of led itself to me wanting to then animate my paintings, and I just feel like it brings another life to the paintings that are otherwise static, and so they can do all kinds of things, that can perform, they have sound, there is another layer of storytelling that way, just having them do things that maybe under normal circumstances the painting wouldn't do. So at the core, I'm still a painter, but I just feel that now I'm bringing painting with me into new territory. And so animation is one of the expression of that.
I find it really, yeah, I find that's really beautiful and moving. And when working with you, actually, a point of inspiration to explore, to take these kind of fixed ideas and to see how can we interconnect them and how can they react to one another. And I'm really excited about working with you on our future installation project together.
Absolutely. Yeah, me too. I'm very excited about it.
I find it really interesting in the animation how every character is a chimera in many ways. So there are these composite creatures, these fairy tale like beings with different animal and human like characteristics, except for the kitten, who has their own identity the whole time, but goes from animated to real.
So yeah, the kitten played a big role in the animation for sure. But as far as the other characters that are sort of deconstructed, reconstructed, I use that a lot as kind of referencing how in life, at some point we kind of break apart, feel like, or at least in my experience, kind of growing up, you think you're like one solid person, then things happen and just kind of personality gets a little bit shattered, and then you kind of then walk around and trying to piece yourself together. And so that those are kind of the things I'm thinking about when I'm constructing my characters.
And now I'm going to show you the most recent project that I worked on that I just finished in mid-April of 2021. It's a collaboration with Miro Magloire, a choreographer with whom I've worked on several pieces, but never from a distance. And this piece is called Noman, and it is a video project that Miro completed earlier on in the pandemic. And then I contributed a different spin on it with audio later on. So now I'd like to introduce Miro and talk a little bit about the piece.
Hi, Miro. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Miro Magloire. I'm the artistic director of New Chamber Ballet, which is a small New York-based company that brings together live music, usually live contemporary music and live dancing in new productions in the round setting. And I have had the great joy to have collaborated with you several times before. It's been a very interesting year, of course, for a dance company, but this was one of the early projects we started to do in the very early days of the pandemic. And now we're finishing it now and kind of like the last, hopefully, days of the pandemic. So it sort of spanned the whole year.
So it's bookends in many ways, which I think is perhaps a little bit interesting considering the title and the conception of the piece. And so thinking about the idea of shadows and sundials and time and cause and effect, and I would be curious if you'd like to muse on that a little bit and how this inspired the choreography, and particularly working with the lens instead of live dance.
Yeah. So you know, when it became clear that we wouldn't be doing anything live for a while, and the only option to be artistically active as a dance company was on camera, my first reaction was I was not interested, because so much about the idea of New Chamber Ballet is about live performance and to explore different facets of live performance, that this seemed like something I was really more than happy to pass on. Then, however, my only way that I could find to get interested into it was by thinking, okay, but the camera has one thing that a real audience member in person can never do. It can really move around quite a bit, and it can focus in on angles that you cannot usually, that's not part of an audience's experience usually. You can go very high, very low, and you can go very close to the dancers. And I started to get really interested in not so much the film part, but the camera angle part. What could I do with the camera? So I went with the dancers and really kind of tried to play with extreme camera angles. And how does that change the composition of what we see? And more importantly for me at the time, how does it change the sense of weight? Because so much of choreography, as I am doing it right now, has to do with the audience's perception of body lines, but more of body relations and body weight, and how, you know, how things lean, how things fall. Sort of if I had to put it in a nutshell, I would say choreography is the story of one or several bodies' weights over time. And so this became very interesting, because suddenly the same body in actually choreographic phrases that I didn't create new, that I took from old pieces, but just by turning it around and filming it from above, below, at different angles and different distances, started to tell an entirely different story. That was one thing. And then the other thing, of course, it was, you know, we filmed this maybe a year ago when New York was still in the final days of kind of a lockdown. So everything was deserted, and we all had this feeling that there was so much time because we were at home all day long. And at the same time, we were very busy online, but there was this sense of like, there's so much more time than normally because you don't have to run here and there and here and there. So the sense of experiencing time differently, I think, was very on my mind at that moment. And yeah, I think now if I, now if I look at the film, I find that that's really found its way into it.
One of the, I think that the film allows us to time travel due to the juxtapositions of the edits along with the weights. And one of the things I really enjoy about attending your performances is the way that you have bodies interact with one another. And in this case, the same person gets to interact with themselves and their different body parts and different surfaces. And I found this very inspirational when working on the sonic elements. And I decided to go back into an archive of old pieces. And I have a piece for solo cello that was premiered by Ansi Kartunen called Ainsi Soit-il. And so what I decided to do is to take this and to do this kind of macro granular synthesis to prismize this audio and take the different weights and bowings of this cello performance and turn them up around themselves to kind of complement what you were doing with the dance.
Sometimes our collaborators are not only humans, but machines. And in a time when I couldn't listen to acoustic music, despite being quite well versed at doing things on the computer and working with digital electronics, I really wanted to make sounds and to experience touch. So I got myself this little gift of a Make Noise No Coast and started doing improvisations on a daily basis, mixing these with different field recordings. So the next piece you're going to hear is a piece called Drink Rain, which began as an electroacoustic, just two-channel tape piece that I wrote, mixing field recordings, vocal performance, poetry, and these beautiful little devices. And so the idea here was, how do I map the digital onto analog and then filter it back into the digital domain? And I'm happy to introduce a really dear friend of mine and collaborator, Luc Dubois, who contributed by making gorgeous visuals with oscilloscopes for this project. And so now you're going to hear a little conversation that we had together.
So this is an oscilloscope. This is a analog cathode ray tube kind of green phosphor oscilloscope. Oscilloscopes are really interesting. You know, they're basically like televisions that are wired wrong, right? So when you think about like an old school television, the signal, like like NBC News or whatever, is the intensity, and then the thing is an electron gun that's got a locked scan rate on it. So there are these magnets kind of going like, an oscilloscope is the other way around. The intensity is constant, and you send it signals for where to move the thing, where to move the ray gun. And what I've been doing is driving all the sounds from the piece into it one at a time, and coming up with different ways of taking the signals and manipulating them in a way to create different kinds of images. And they're sort of based on these things called oscillographics, these ideas that, you know, if you send kind of simple signals into an oscilloscope, you can make, you know, circles and figure eights and like little loop-de-loops and boxes and squares. So sort of taking that and kind of driving it to the extreme. So if you start with one of your tracks, your vocal track here, I can change how smooth it goes, right? So I can make it quite, you know, quite liquid, right, by envelope following it. But I can then also say, I can quantize it, and now it'll look all nice and pixelated. And so I've got a bunch of different kind of looks that I was playing with over the course of making the video.
So you do a lot of work with digital video, and I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the advantages of using this analog oscilloscope.
And the oscilloscope isn't the only thing that's analog. I'm also washing the sound through a bunch of old synthesizers. So if I sort of spin my camera around, you can sort of see the rest of this room. You know, the stuff in the back is letting me do things like applying like envelope following to the signals as well. So it stays really, really kind of like smooth, and I can kind of like put my hands on the knobs and really kind of feel a good spot for where it looks cool. And there's really nothing else like it. You can do it digitally, but then you're kind of limited to thinking in terms of pixels, right? So you're basically like just kind of almost moving a cursor around a screen. The phosphor has a really nice kind of burn rate, so it leaves a trail. There's an upper limit how fast you can move the thing. And so if you overdrive it, right, if you make it move too fast, so if I try to get it to plot every sample in one of your sounds, it'll screw up. It won't be able to do it. And so what'll happen is it'll start to lag. And so instead of getting like a super jagged waveform, you end up with this really kind of sensual, messed up, like broken curve that I think is really cool. And I think it just goes really nice with your piece, and it goes really nice with the sound. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because my process of generating the sound was this same kind of reverse construction, and taking digital signals, putting them into analog machines, taking them out, and then assembling everything again.
Yeah. No, these things
it's a cool connection.
These things are super fun, and you know, you could try this yourself. You can get these on eBay for like a couple $100. The one problem is, you know, they might explode.
before. From the pulse at my throat. We've been here before. Here. We've been here before.
Thank you very much for spending some time listening to these collaborative projects that I got to make with a brilliant team of artists. I encourage you to go out and listen to their works, and if you'd like to hear more of my own music, please visit my website, ninacyoung.com. Thank you again, and I hope this gives us all a little bit of joy and inspiration, and perhaps can transport us in a bit of escapism to other places and other times.